Well, thank you. You should be alarmed that I don't have a text with me, but I wouldn't be able to read it if I had it, so. And I must start with both an admission and an apology. Manuel told me I would be speaking, and I've been thinking about what I should say, and I was still thinking about it last night, and I think I should have changed it after lunch. So this is going to be a little sketchy and improvisational. But given my background, I want to talk about popular culture and mass media. Gabriel Meyer and I were part of a group that sponsored a reading and lecture by Robert Pinsky, the poet laureate, last week at Mount St. Mary's in Los Angeles. And Robert, beyond reading his wonderful poetry, posed a question of what role culture, in this sense he was speaking more narrowly of the arts, might play in bringing us together. And seeing that I feel we all recognize our obligation as Catholics to be playing some kind of a mediating role in the messy world that we're in now, I took this question very seriously as an obligation. What kind of role can popular culture play? Robert felt it could play perhaps a major role in some way. Now, I'm not a scholar, and I'm not going to get semantically picky here, but I do want to pick on the word culture a little bit. You know, in 1946, T.S. Eliot, in addressing the question of culture, cautioned that anyone that uses the word culture should be obliged to both define it and give an example. Now, that was in 1946. And I think the problem is perhaps even more acute now because I think it is a terribly misused word. Now, you'll be relieved to know I'm not going to try and define it, but let me suggest what some of the characteristics that we would associate with culture, popular or otherwise. Continuity, organic, habitual. I mean, we have habits and customs. It usually has a transcendent origin of some sort, usually religion. But it's organic that it grows and lives. It's a way that we live. It's the way that we think. I don't think we've got a culture in America right now. Not in terms of a popular culture. We have remnants of some. We have pockets of some. But the generational breakdown alone, as I think, certainly since the 60s, is questioned when we use the word good, whether we're talking about behavior or art. We may know what we mean, and we may respect each other here, that based on taste and background, we may agree, but I think it's shooting a blank with most people. Alistair McIntyre described our moral philosophy in America at the end of the 70s as emotivism. That is simply strong subjective emotion as the basis of moral judgment for even educated Americans. Thank God we've at least got that. So I'm going to posit that one of the problems we face if we're going to use popular culture is we're going to have to figure out what it means and perhaps how to begin to create or reinvigorate it. Again, I'm not a scholar, I'm not going to do any kind of historical analysis, but what happened? How did we get to this point of chaos? Incidentally, I'm not going to speak about politics because I think politics is symptomatic in all respect to the seriousness of those of you who have made political commitments. I don't think the real problem right now is it's the culture or lack of culture beneath. It's the lack of moral coherence that is creating the chaos in politics. That's my view. How did this happen? How did we get to where we are? Well, in the first place, the breakdown of the family. I'm preaching to the choir here, so I don't need to elaborate on that. But once you see this kind of fragmentation of the American family, the family is the social unit of culture and society. Once that begins to fragment, you're going to have further fragmentation as well. I think also in my lifetime, and I'm speaking about a half a century, the second half of the 20th century, the prolongation of wars, and I'm not speaking politically as to whether they were justified or not, from Korea to Vietnam to interventions around the world, the Middle East, there's never been a real resolution. There's never been a sense of catharsis. There's never been a sense of ultimate meaning for most of us in this. And I think that is seriously undercut the credibility of our leaders. And I'm not making a judgment on them, but I think the moral authority of our national leaders have been undercut by that. But the main culprit, if we want to talk about the prevalence of incoherence and fragmentation, is the mass media. So this is a little bit of a repentance, a little mea culpa on my part, in that I spent more than 30 years producing work for the mass media. I think the mass media has been the dominant factor in the last half century in shaping the way Americans think and behave to a great extent. And it's not a matter of content, it's a matter of a mode of perception. I mean, McLuhan went into this, Father Ong, there's been many scholars that have looked at the medium is the message, is the way that you perceive things. When you look at television and movies, particularly over a prolonged period of time, the first thing to recognize is that even if it's a very serious, good film, it almost never has adequate context. It's almost always a radical discontinuity in it. There is also, and my friend Gail Bailey can elaborate on the ideas of René Girard, the use of the scapegoat. There's always someone to blame. Good movies almost have someone to blame in them, even good movies. So polarity, discontinuity, fragmentation, and polarity just go with the territory of it. I can give you some examples of this, of the attitude. Again, I'm not looking for culprits here. I'm not looking for the people I knew and worked with, I loved and respected for the most part. Nobody was trying to fragment American society, but what we were in the business. We were in a business. We were making commodities. And one of the finest directors I worked with, like to pontificate a little bit, he said, "You know what we're doing? We're selling emotion. That's what we're selling to the American people. We're selling them emotion." And then a producer who wasn't perhaps quite as intellectual, but very, very successful, also gave us a lecture on what was needed for a good script and a good movie. He said, "We need whammos." Now, that's not exactly a technical term, but it's a good Hollywood term. It means impact. It means gut level. It could be sexual appeal, violence, a shock, something that really hits the audience in the guts. So he would look at a script and he says, "Not enough whammos." Or he would look at a cut of a film and he would say, "No, the second reel needs another whammo." So we were in the whammo business. And now, again, I think we can see, in all respect to politics, it's a form of entertainment now. We just saw a season of whammos, didn't we? And they're still coming. And they're still coming. All right. So what can we do about this? Well, I think we need to recognize our obligation as mediators, as Christians. We need to have a better analysis, a diagnosis of what's going on, and I'm speaking to scholars here and like that. This is where your responsibility. We need better depth of understanding what's happening now. I think we could also start by examining our own anxieties and fears and visions among us. That would be, we're living in this atmosphere of polarity and division. We're not going to escape it. We're not going to escape it. We need to address the potential divisions, and so we can address our own differences with respect and love, which I know we all want to do. Let me suggest what I see among American Catholics is basically three orientations now. The first would be, and these are all good friends of mine, the first would be those who completely disagree with my point of view. They do not, they would find my point of view too apocalyptic, too negative. They would say, no, the institutions of government and education are sound. They're good. They just need some reform. They just need to be made better. But there's no need for any basic big change going on. I won't linger on that one because I don't think that's held that strongly as it was at one time by the generation who deserved to think that way because they were the immigrants, the Catholic immigrants who built this country. I think the more prevalent point of view is what I would call the restorationist point of view. That is those Catholics who say, okay, the institutions we can still keep, we can revive them, they still have tensile strength, but they need foundation. We need to go back and recover the moral and spiritual foundations of the country. A kind of moral revival, kind of the great awakenings of the past. I'm very sympathetic to this. But then there are those of us, and I admit that I am sympathetic to this point of view, that have the point of view that's being described by some people as the Benedict option, usually negatively. When that term is used, it's used negatively. It comes actually from the last lines of Alistair MacIntyre's After Virtue, in which he looks into the future and he says, who knows, maybe it's going to be another St. Benedict. And what is implied by this is a more independent, autonomous building of Catholic community. We need to step forward and work together. Now, this is usually understandably criticized as being too exclusive, maybe Gnostic, Manichaean, and I can see the dangers in that. Certainly there's a danger of our, trying to isolate ourselves. I don't think that should be the impulse. But I think what we need to do, and this could start with the artists, is we need to come together, join together, and create community that can be a model for others. None of these problems are going to be solved by abstractions. They're going to be, to the extent this country can be brought back together, it's got to become credible by other Americans looking at, people say, okay, look at them. Look how they're living. Looking how they're working together. I respect the reformers. I respect the restorationists. I don't think that's going to happen, frankly. And so what sounds like the most utopian, that we should really begin to build our own communities, identifiable Catholic communities in the work we do, I think is actually, from my point of view, the most realistic thing. But in any case, whatever we do, and I'm willing to help the reformers and the restorationists, I'll pitch in, sure. Whatever we do, let's recognize these divisions with mutual respect and love. Because if we can keep to the love that comes through Jesus and to the truth that comes through the Gospels, if we can put that love and truth together for others, we will have our own Catholic whammos.